welcome back to Aligned, Engaged, Fulfilled. Now, in our last episode, I sat down with Matt Pupsel. In that episode, he told us that entropy never rests, that market disruption, anxiety, and stress are actively pulling our human systems apart. And we learned that to counteract that, we have to intentionally build the vital energy of what he called commitment. But how exactly do you build that energy if the systems around us are so broken? How do we find the mental capacity to actually engage? So, if Matt showed us the macro environment, today we're looking at the micro. The answer lies in the actual neurological wiring of our brains and how the exact language that we use dictates the reality that we experience. My guest today is going to show us how to hack that internal wiring. And I'm thrilled to sit down with a fellow San Diegan, Stephanie Garcia. Stephanie is an award winning digital marketing expert with 15 years of ad agency experience. She's helped everyone from MasterChefs to actual astronauts go from unknown to unforgettable. But the secret engine behind her proven system isn't just marketing tactics, it's neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. As a certified NLP trainer, Stephanie teaches people how to overcome fear, build magnetic confidence, and rewire their minds for success. So today, we're taking her expertise and we're pointing it directly at the workplace. We're going to ask, how does the language a leader use shape the internal reality of their team? And just as importantly, how does our own internal language dictate our capacity to survive and engage in a brutal job market? We're going to move from the macro forces of the economy to the micro forces of the mind. We're going to explore how NLP directly fuels our ability to engage, the psychological weight of the words that we choose, and how to permanently fix the misalignments in our identity and our behavior. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Stephanie. I'm so excited to have you.
Let's do this. I'm excited.
I'm so excited. But before we get into it and really dive into the heavy neuroscience and workplace systems, Stephanie, I have to ask, Master Chefs and astronauts? I
Yeah.
mean, coaching an astronaut for a live interview in space. I'm intrigued. Tell us about that.
Gosh. So this particular astronaut, she's going to be in outer space. This is a partnership with UC San Diego, and they wanted to live stream broadcast it because we are doing the first astronaut, and celebrating the 50th anniversary with a US postage stamp. And so they wanted to get her take on it. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, Stephanie, I don't know what to say." I'm like, "Do you know who you are? Do you know how much you've actually accomplished?" And I think it was interesting because, yes, she's an astronaut and she accomplished so much. And then in the back of her mind, she was still thinking, what will people say? What will people think? And then you have to remind a client, it's like, go back to when you were a little girl. What would you say to her? And focus on that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Is this for a upcoming launch or this is a launch that has already happened?
This was a launch that happened a long time ago, like a couple of years ago. So we were doing the Sally Ride, and
Hmm.
it was launching her. It was with the US Postal Office, and we wanted to get out the stamp, and so we had the astronaut kinda share her take for being one of the astronauts as well, so it was really cool.
Wow. Is the pressure of coaching somebody who's going to be orbiting the Earth completely different from coaching an executive, say, in a boardroom, or is human psychology completely the same no matter the altitude?
That's a really great question. I would say that with every single person, I think the basic understanding is that communication is like water. There's not a single day that doesn't go by that we do that, and so we talk to other people via email, via Slack, via text, but the most important conversation that you have is gonna be the conversation with yourself. And so, whether you're a C level executive, whether you're an astronaut or you're competing on MasterChef, at the end of the day, what are you saying to yourself? And hopefully, it's a good conversation that you're rooting for yourself. And if it's not, then that's something to probably explore a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, to a lot of people in the corporate world, NLP either sounds like a clinical psychology term or a secret sales tactic.
Mhm.
And if we're being contrarian in this conversation, traditional psychologists sometimes criticize it for lacking empirical hard evidence. I'm sure you
Mhm.
know. But
Yeah,
for those of us that are doing the gritty work of alignment and engagement and trying to understand how to find fulfillment in anything in the work that we do, the practical value behind it is undeniable. How do
I
you break
agree
down the
completely.
actual components of NLP, of neuro linguistic programming for that professional?
For
Like
that
practically
layperson.
speaking. Yeah, for that yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
always tell everyone it's like, "Look, listen, you came into this world and you don't necessarily have an SOP for how your brain works. So wouldn't it make sense for you to understand what your conscious and your unconscious programming is?" So for example, as you got ready this morning, hopefully you brushed your teeth. And as you were brushing your teeth, were you consciously aware of whether or not you brush first on the left side of your face or on the right side of your face, right? Some things we know consciously of what we do, but there are some certain things of why we don't know why certain things push our buttons, why certain words cause us to react a certain way. And when you spend some time to really understand, well, what was that story? What was that trigger? What's What's the underlying thing that's in there? And everyone has their own different model of the world, as we would say, kind of like your different worldview. For example, if you ever say to me, Stephanie, what's your dream job? Job makes me want to vomit. Job. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I've
It's in the
never
sound.
fantasized about job, but I do think about I move towards words like legacy and life's work. And I think when you really understand how people map words in their minds and aligns to their values, that's the difference that makes the difference. And yet some people only have the flexibility to only communicate from their own model of the world. So we have this saying that the law of requisite variety, the person with the most flexibility controls the system. So if you can easily tell how someone processes information through the words that they use, well, wouldn't you want to use that strategically?
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we really dive into kind of the mechanics behind it, I want to get really real about our current socioeconomic reality. Millions of professionals are really fundamentally exhausted, right? And when my capacity is essentially at zero, the idea of having to understand, let alone rewire my internal language feels like another exhausting chore. But NLP emphasizes outcomes thinking, which is really about shifting the focus from what is the problem to what is the desired goal. So when we're as tired as many of us are today, is policing our internal language a losing game, or does the brutal reality of the world that we're in right now actually make this outcomes thinking the absolute most critical survival tool that we have to protect our energy and maintain our ability to engage?
I think that's even just an interesting word to use as far as like policing our words because in reality it's more like I think most people will easily tell you what it is that they don't want. I could go to someone and be like, "How was your day?" And they're going to tell you all the things that went wrong. And then if you say to them, "Okay, well, what do you want instead?" You may see them start to buffer in their minds because they don't focus as much as they do on the things that they do want. They focus on all the things that are wrong. But if that's where your attention goes, well, then that's where energy is going to flow. And so when you ask someone, okay, so if there is something happening in the workforce that you don't like, what would you like instead? Maybe you want a better team. Maybe you want better communication. Okay, great. But how would you define that? When you say better communication in the workplace, what does that look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Can you actually visualize and describe what it is that you want? Or are you just giving me another word salad?
Word salad, definitely.
Yeah,
Well, I want to,
especially in corporate.
especially in corporate. Well, let's look at the actual data behind the exhaustion that I just mentioned and
Sure.
start to kind of frame this into what we're going to focus our conversation around because Gallup is my bible. The Gallup State of the Workplace report is my bible, and in that study every year they provide statistics on where the world is in terms of engagement, disengagement, and a bunch of other metrics. And in the most recent report, they reported that about only 21% of the global workforce is actively engaged at work, and 79% are disengaged. Now, when we see a massive statistic like that, the default reaction is for us to blame the company, the toxic culture, bad managers, broken systems. And while that certainly plays a huge role, we also have to look inward. In NLP, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a focus on how we generalize our reality. So if someone constantly tells themselves, I never get picked for the good projects, or I'm just a middle manager, or whatever, they've essentially programmed a permanent calling for themselves.
Yes.
When we look at that other 79% of disengaged workers, given that the system is often genuinely broken and that it is the source of a lot of these problems, how does NLP help us to reclaim our agency within those systems without letting the organization off the hook?
So fascinating. I think a lot of it too is is a lot of people have been should on their whole entire lives. Like I should work here, I should do this, I should do that. And at some point you come to your desk and you realize, what is it that am I really doing? Is this really what I value? Is this really what I want to do with my life? And I think that's where you can really look inward and say, in the context of my career, what's most important to me? And oftentimes it's not even about money. It's about, let's say, recognition. Let's say it's creativity or being challenged. And if your values, if your cup isn't being filled in that sense, I could totally see you becoming disengaged. But even then, if you ask people, what do you want? They're like, what do you mean? What do I want? Well, what specifically do you want? And if you could tell me what it is that you want, can you act as if you have it? Can you act as if you're working on a team where you are engaged? Can you act that out? And I think some people are just so disillusioned and they're just completely wrapped into this. This is who I am. This is my script. This is, oh, this is how I'm going to wake up today. They've never really sat down to write down what it is that they really want.
Hmm. Which is a huge step that is just missing and would make all the difference in their ability to move into this next phase. So, how do we catch those subconscious distortions before they destroy our careers, our work, our business, whatever the
Before
context
they
might be? Like,
destroy. It's so,
and
that's so
destroy
true.
might be a strong word, but
I think it's more like, I think it's more self awareness, right? So in NLP, we also talk about the meta model, which is developed by Dr. Virginia Satir. And what we know in NLP is basically there's 11 million bits of information that comes into your neurology. And it's being filtered by your visual, your auditory, your kinesthetic, your olfactory, and your gustatory. But oftentimes we have this selective attention. And so we'll delete, we'll distort, and we'll generalize. And so, based off of that, we'll have this internal picture in our minds of what this means and what this looks like. And then it will actually cause a physical reaction, which is our behavior. And so, in that respect, it's really are you really seeing the picture? Or in this case, let's say, I'm trying to find a book. Here's a, here's a book. Oftentimes, you have clients and they're just, I'm in the problem. They're in it. But you
yes.
have to help them zoom out and say, do you see all of the other connections? Do you see everything else that's possible? When someone is in their stuff, they're so in their stuff that they completely forget that they have the internet, they have ChatGPT, they have HR, they have other resources, people that they can lean on. And one thing that we always say is that the mindset that got you into the problem is not the same mindset that's going to take you out of the problem. You're really just one mindset shift away of where it is that you want to be. And as I said before, most people can't even tell you what it is that they want. They'll tell you what they don't want because that's what they've been focusing on. That's what they've been writing about. That's what they've been complaining about. And then the second you ask them, okay, great. What do you want instead? It's like their brain buffers and they go, oh, I never thought about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, from what I've seen with not even just the clients that I've had, but in conversations that I've had through the podcast, through employees that I was leading in my 9 to 5, is that the biggest roadblock is taking any kind of action, mostly because it requires visibility. And so many employees, and again, I say employees because I want to look at this in the work context, but many of them are just terrified of taking any kind of action because of that need to have any sort of visibility. So they're afraid to speak up in meetings or to pitch to executives or their leaders. But NLP teaches the concept of anchoring, which I'd love for you to explain a little bit about.
Sure.
But from my understanding, at the core level, it's about associating a specific internal response, such as confidence, with an external trigger. But walk us through what anchoring means in terms of like NLP and practicing that, and how we could apply that to our context as an employee.
So our context as an employee, I love that. Anchoring at a high level overview, it's stimulus response. You get a notification on your phone. What is it that you want to do? You want to check it. It's stimulus response. And so when you think about you as an employee, your desk can be an anchor. How does your desk make you feel? How does a new Slack message make you feel? And if I were to create an anchor that's not negative, but something much more positive, like let's say the next time a high level executive starts talking to me in a meeting in front of all of my peers, can I create an anchor where I start to feel cool, calm, collected, and I have the clarity to know what it is that I say? And so in that particular moment, to do the process of anchoring, you really have to recall a specific time when you felt like you were totally calm. And in that, if you can remember a specific time as you, this is our script, as you float down into your body, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and really felt the feelings of being totally calm. As a practitioner, I would look at client and I would notice the shift as soon as they were in that state of calm, and I would anchor it, let's say, onto a knuckle. So that way, when neurons fire together, they wire together. So now it's like a little reminder button of when I need to be cool, calm, collected, boom, I can do this. So that's not necessarily a tool that is being taught in the workplace. If anything, it's more taught at a logical level of like, okay, you have to do a presentation, go to Chat GPT, do some role playing of all the different things that you can say. But we all know that sometimes when you're in a high pressure environment, right, your body starts to do things. But if you can have a reminder button that says cool, calm, collected, then you're in a good state of mind at that point.
Yeah, that's powerful. And for anybody who's listening, I think that's such an easy takeaway to leave with, or to leave this episode with, something that you can apply quickly today, tomorrow, as soon as you get off of listening on to this episode, to really start to, again, for lack of a better term, anchor yourself in those situations.
Yeah.
Let's drill down a little bit on on the vocabulary that we use at work, what most people refer to as corporate speak. And I think this is where a lot of people today are really struggling with the humanity behind the world of work, because we constantly, in the world of work, we constantly use terms like high performer or refer to our teams as individual contributors. But words have massive energetic weight. From an NLP perspective, what's the psychological difference between calling somebody a high performer versus a high achiever, or a performer versus a contributor? Like, how do those tiny nuances actually reprogram our behavior?
It comes with the picture, right? So if you said high performer, in my model of the world, what does a high performer do? What are their behaviors? What are their values, beliefs, and attitudes that makes them a high performer? So in my mind, a high performer is someone that takes initiative, that is disciplined, and is committed. They're the type of person where if something needs to be done, they have what I call they have what I call as extreme ownership. They're going to see a project from initiation to completion, right? But that's my definition of it. And so if I were to work with someone on my team and I would say, I want you to be a high performer, they're like, okay, high performer. What does that mean? And so I would have to explain as a manager. So when I say high performer, this is what I mean. And if it's someone that's green in the workplace, I would have to say, okay, so this is what your daily schedule might look like. How does that sound to you? How does that feel to you? Is that something that's something that you can do? And so it's really of how do you teach someone? How do you give an SOP to someone of what it means to be a high performer? Because I can't assume that you know what I mean when I say high performer. You probably have a completely definition altogether.
I think that's such an important nuance for people to understand, because when we go about, again, how we understand the world of work, we operate based on these kind of standardized definitions of these words without recognizing that we do have a different definition of it based on how we've experienced the world. But we're so bound, whether by choice or not, to how those are traditionally defined in the workplace. And we try to operate based on that. And I think more and more people are waking up to the idea that, yeah, it is possible for there to be different definitions of what that means. And they're starting to challenge it. And this is where I think it starts to get really interesting in terms of how NLP can come into play with all of these, because people are now starting to question and they're starting to want to move away from these traditional systems and traditional definitions, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know the right questions to ask. They don't know how to like get their own mindset and mentality out of paralysis, and unlearn all of these things. So, as somebody, let's talk about the unlearning process, for example. How do I use NLP in the process of unlearning what I may have been so used to over the last 10 years? Let's talk about me, for example, right?
Sure.
I spent 20 years in the corporate world. The last 10 years, I was at the same organization. And when I finally left my 9 to 5 and went into entrepreneurship, I had to unlearn so many habits, so many um, definitions that I've set for myself based on that world. And I didn't
Container is
even
what we would say. Yeah, you were in a container that had its own sets of rules, okay?
yeah. And then a year later, I am still dealing with a lot of that unlearning. And I consider myself a very self aware person.
Sure.
Like, I've done a lot of that work and I still feel like there's something missing. So how can NLP be a tool to help in that unlearning process, to either reframe the way that we are looking at things, compared to how we used to,
Yeah.
or just change our mentality altogether? It might be a heavy question, but I'm sure you're used to these questions.
It's kind of how deep do I wanna go without getting you or even your readers lost? The best way to describe it is so even when you were explaining what it was like working at your 9 to 5, and I hinted at every organization has its own values, beliefs, attitudes, and systems, yes? And so in the world of entrepreneurship, we call this values level thinking. And it's a wonderful book by Dr. Adriana James if you want to go ahead and read it. But she says that in values level 4 thinking, it's usually there's a right way and there's a wrong way. Okay. There's a right way and a wrong way. And that's why you'll see this values level thinking 4 appear in organizations, in churches, in communities, and groups. It's kind of like there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And if you don't follow the rule book, then you're in the wrong, right? Now, most entrepreneurs have what we call a values level 5 thinking. It means they've opened it up to realize, wait, it doesn't have to be black or white. The mindset is more along the lines of what would happen if. It's like, I know you've always done it that way, but what would happen if? And oftentimes people fall onto the effect side of life where they think of all the negative things that can happen. Well, congratulations, you have an amazing imagination. Can you use those powers of imagination to now focus on what it is that you want instead? That's where it starts to shift. Okay. And so, really, it's not necessarily like you don't really have to unlearn anything. I think it's more of just an awareness of, I know it's like even code switching, right? I know that if I'm going to this event over here, my demeanor, my actions are going to be very different than if I'm going to be hanging out with friends. Okay. Every Every entity is going to have its own values level thinking. Even how you function at a family, like this is why sometimes even in family, you're like, wait, I know what's right and wrong, but you have the matriarch or you have the patriarch. And whatever they say is right. And so that's going to be a different values level thinking. And so we as humans, as creatures, we will navigate to whatever values level thinking that we have to do in order to survive that container. Does that make sense? If I go into a values level 4 company, right? And I'm starting to challenge ideas and I start to be contrarian, I could be considered as like, oh, you're out of line. You're not following the rules. And so I could be ostracized in that. However, if I was in a vibe coding community, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to build it. What happens if I do this? I am actually rewarded for my thinking. I'm rewarded for being innovative. So it really just depends. At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, am I in the right container?
I have never been speechless in a podcast episode from processing what my guest has just said and trying to think about that in the context of like what I have done. I usually am really good at just jumping right in with a response, and you just got me thinking about the past year and what I've been like trying to put into practice with my own journey. Because again, like it's such a huge difference for me in that experience of a- again 10 years or 20 years of this corporate mentality, this like especially my last few years in executive leadership of even just the mentality of like work all day, like be busy, be productive, and like just stay within that structure. I'm struggling to even articulate like the difference in it. But on the flip side of going into entrepreneurship and having the freedom and being okay with the freedom to manage your time and the freedom to like not work all the time and
Yeah.
be okay with that, like the shift in the
It's okay to not
mindset.
work all the time.
I know, but there's a pro like and so I have to battle with like, is this just the way that I'm wired? Because I recognize that I love working. That's important to me. I like contributing. And if I'm not contributing to something, I feel useless, purposeless. And so I've had to battle with, is it the environment for me or was it just the context? Meaning, again, to your point, and I guess this is where it now clicks in my brain, was I in the right container or was I in the wrong container? So I just spent that last 30 seconds helping myself understand.
It's good. Yeah.
So, okay, this idea of language programming behavior maps perfectly onto my consulting framework, which I have dubbed the More method. But in my method that I work on with my clients, I talk about zones of misalignment, which are identity, behavior, and communication.
Mhm.
And in my coaching is based off of my experience and expertise in kind of this convergence of leadership, marketing, and strategy. And you've probably heard this because I was your guys' client and I shared some of this with you guys in
Yeah.
some calls. But the first zone of misalignment, based on my method, focuses on friction in the workplace based on identity, which is coming from the gap between a person's internal values and how they present themselves to the world. And this applies just as much to somebody who is trying to figure out why they keep self sabotaging in performance reviews as it does to a leader trying to close the gap between who they are and how they're perceived.
Yeah.
In NLP, and you mentioned this already earlier in the conversation, there's a concept of reframing to change the context or meaning of a situation. How can we use reframing to bridge that identity gap? How do we shift that internal language so that our authentic self matches the professional brand that we're projecting and allows us to engage authentically?
Yeah. I'll give you a really good example. So this happened in one of our trainings. One of our students, so there's different communication styles. There's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and auditory digital. Let me leave you at auditory digital. Auditory digital individuals are the type of folks that love to give you processes, frameworks, and details. In their minds, there needs to be like a place for it to fit. And for this particular student, she was saying sometimes when I'm talking to the CEO or a visionary, as I start getting into the details, their eyes just start to glaze over. And I was like, well, there's nothing wrong with that because, as I said before, the person with the most flexibility controls the system. So, can you go from specificity over into global and explain the big picture so that way you could get an agreement with who you're communicating with? And she said, oh, that's something I'm going to have to work on. Then work on it. There's nothing wrong with going into the details and the specificity. A context reframe would be like, wouldn't I want to hire a lawyer that just combs through all of the details, that looks for things that I wouldn't have even known? So it's more, again, it's kind of, are you in the right container? Right? So maybe if the CEO wants a high level overview of a project, but if you're a highly detailed person and you don't have the skill set yet to speak in high level summaries or bullet points, maybe that's a skill that you want to do. But if I was a CEO and I just know if I talk to this person, they're going to drown me and drag me into a checklist and details. Maybe I might want to talk to someone else who's probably the manager or the director or someone else where I could get the high level. But at the end of the day, it's more, do you have the behavioral flexibility to go from one model of the world of one communication style to another communication style? Most people, as you mentioned before, they're going from one meeting to the other. They're burnt out. They're this, they're that. They just don't even have the capability. But the moment you actually meet someone who is aligned and whole and who has taken the time to learn how to communicate in all the different ways, it feels different. You start to feel as if you're actually seen, you're heard, you're understood, all the things. But
Yeah.
again, that takes time to actually be aware of that, but also put it into practice.
Well, I want to get a little granular on the communication styles because as I was researching NLP to try to understand at least some foundation of it to be able to have
Sure.
this conversation with you,
Yeah.
one of the things that I found was, and I've taught communication workshops, right? Like I've taught leadership workshops. And this is actually something that I think is really fascinating about NLP because I think it takes a lot of what is usually trained in the world of communication and leadership, but it makes it much more granular, much deeper. Whereas typical trainings on communication is so surface level, it's so mechanical in terms of like, oh, communication, there's a sender and there's a receiver, and you know what I mean? And NLP like really takes it up to a much deeper level.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I found was this notion or this idea that for somebody who is like an auditory versus a visual communicator, like you can't just say like, "Oh, I hear you. Oh, I see you." Like you have to be aware of the type of communicator that they are and respond accordingly, which I thought was so fascinating. So for those of us who have no idea what this is, can you give a little bit insight of that? Because I think it's such a simple thing and
Yeah.
it's so natural for us, like when somebody says something, us to say, "Okay, I hear you," and not even recognize that that influences the way that that person feels about the way you just responded.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So, first one is going to be visual. Visual communicators, I'm by default a visual communicator. That means I talk really fast. Sometimes I talk with my hands. Sometimes I even have a thought, but that idea feels like a thought bubble and I have to say it because if I don't say it, it disappears.
Mm, yeah,
So, visual folks sometimes it seems as if they're interrupting you, but it's not necessarily that they're interrupting you. It's that their ideas are coming out so fast. And sometimes visual communicators, as they're speaking, they might unintentionally use a lot of filler words like the ums, the ahs, because they're trying to find the right word. And if they don't see the right word in their brain, they just might give you a sound was like, oh, it's that. I want that. I want our next marketing campaign to be like, ah. And then the auditory person is like, well, I heard that he wants, but I don't know what that means. An auditory communicator is the type of person where sometimes when you're talking, they might lean in with their good ear. And the fascinating thing about them is that oftentimes they can repeat back what you said word for word. They're the type of people where they sit there and are like, well, just a moment ago, you said, and it's verbatim, which to a visual person is makes them, it's like, it's bonkers. It's unreal because how did you capture all of that? Now, a kinesthetic communicator is the type of person where they want to feel as if they're on the same page. Do they have a firm grasp? They're the type of learner where when you walk them through the process, let me hold your hand and walk you through this. Let me make sure we're on the same page, right? They want to feel comfortable with you before they buy into your idea. Now, an auditory digital, on the other hand, is like, what do you mean feelings? Here's the data, here's the stats, here's all the different things. This is the data. We should move forward. These are the trends. I can't wait for your feelings. And visual, that's a great idea, but how do you plan to put this into place? Right. And so what's interesting is that you can take what we call a representational systems test to figure out which communication style you lean more towards, which is awesome. That's great. But where you'll find the most conflict is where you score high on a test and where you score low on the test. because you'll find that majority of the conflict could possibly be between you're strong in visual communication and you're very low in kinesthetic. And so you'll never, or not never, I'll take that back. You may find that there's a mismatch. There's no rapport whatsoever between the two communicators because no one in that situation, in that example, is taking the time to be flexible. Where it's like, well, I see what you're saying, or um, I see where we're not on the same page, or I see da 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 something, right? I feel like fill in the blank. And so that's a high level overview of the different communication styles. And you could get that not only in the words that people say, you could skim through someone's email, you could skim through someone's text messages, you could take a look at their social media just to even see how they naturally express their ideas.
How nuanced is that? Like, how programmed is that in you? And I ask because, like, what if sometimes the ums are because you haven't had lunch yet and you're running on Cheez Its?
I mean, in all honesty, like your communication style is most likely is going to shift because if I'm going to be giving a presentation, let's say to the board of investors, I'm probably going to be I'm going to tie it to a visual. Here's the big picture, and then I'll go into the details. But the second I spend time with my daughter, I'm going to be all in my feels, right? I I can't be going on to a Saturday, let's say on Easter. I'm like, okay, and then we're gonna do this and then we're gonna do that. I mean, she's enjoying, she's in her kinesthetic, she's in her present moment. And sometimes as an auditory digital, you're thinking like, well, what comes next? What comes next? What comes next? Where a kinesthetic, well, let me back up. How people process time is very different too. Some people are what we call in time, and some people are what we call through time. And that's something that you could probably even research on your own because it sounds like you really like to do a lot of research.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's dig into that like kind of fluidity, flexibility a little bit more
Yeah.
because the other two zones in my framework are like behavior, and we've been talking about communication, but so it's identity, behavior, and communication. And NLP teaches behavioral flexibility, which you've already brought up in this conversation. And this idea that if what you're doing isn't working, then you have to change your behavior until you get the result that you want. But a lot of people are stuck in very rigid behavioral loops at work,
Yes.
doing the same things and expecting different outcomes. And yes, that defines insanity. But how do we use linguistic programming to permanently fix misalignments in our behavior and unlock that flexibility?
Interesting. So I would ask you, how do you do the process of misalignment? How do you do the process of getting the result that you don't want? And then I would congratulate them and say, congratulations, you found a strategy that doesn't work. Now, nothing changes if nothing changes. So, in your strategy, what do you need to change to get a different outcome? So, let's say, for example, again, I'm just coming out of training, so I have plenty of examples to share.
Yeah,
One of our
bring them.
students was saying that she's like, I know I'm really smart. She's an EOS integrator. And that means she comes in as a fractional CEO and she really helps a lot of her clients get everything locked in and squared away and abiding by the EOS framework. And she was telling me, like, well, Stephanie, sometimes when I have to give a presentation, it's like right before I speak, I just stop breathing. I'm like, what do you mean you stop breathing? It's like, I don't know. For some reason, I stop breathing and then I don't know what to say. I'm like, well, of course that makes sense because if you're not breathing, oxygen isn't going to your brain. So now your body is freaking out, and your body is like, wait, oxygen isn't coming to my brain. I don't even care about what it is that I have to say. Survival mode. I just need to do something, and they spaz out. And so in that particular case, I was like, okay, so what would you want instead? If that's what you do, what would you want to do instead? She's like, well, I want to go up there and I want to feel confident. I'm like, okay, well, show me what confident means. And so we had her stand in front of the room where it's like chin up, shoulders back. I was like, okay, so that's what it needs to look like when you're about to give this presentation. I'm like, okay, then what happens? What happens next? She goes, well, then I take a deep breath. I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. And she goes, and I think what she started to realize is that we have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. Like when you watch a movie, if someone laughs in a movie, you tend to laugh too. If someone cries, you're going to start tearing up yourself. And so if you go up there and you take a deep breath, you inhale and you exhale, and now you're cool, calm, collected. Guess what? Every other person in that room then becomes cool, calm, collected. But if your old strategy was to stand up there and stop breathing and now you freak out, guess what? Everyone else is freaking out too. And so again, it's more or less, how do you do the process of that? And if it's working, awesome, keep doing it. If it's not working, then let's create a new strategy. I feel like most people don't realize that they have a strategy for everything. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, it's just a matter of eliciting it and taking it out of your client to figure out, is this a problem? And if it is a problem, how do we make it not a problem?
I don't know what it is for me because and I think for me it's contextual because there are instances where I can get up in front of a boardroom and speak to executives no problem. And then I'll go and do a keynote and right before I'm dry heaving and I feel like I want to throw up and I just overthink and it just puts me in a different mindset.
Yeah.
And so it very much is contextual for me where certain circumstances, no problem. I can do it
So
without
then let me
even
ask you
thinking
this.
about it. Yeah.
How do you know when it's time to start dry heaving and overthinking? What's the trigger? How do you know it's time to do it?
Hmm. I don't know if I even know when it's time to do it.
But you do it so well. Like
The dry
like,
heaving?
yeah, like, let me give you an Oscar because you know how to do it. So, how do you start that process, right? It doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
There has
I
to be
think it
some type of trigger or cue that says, "Now's the time to overthink."
yeah. I think the okay, now that I think about it, I think the trigger is when it's the first time I'm doing something. So if it's the first time I'm talking to a group about a certain topic,
Okay, does it have to be that specific group or that specific topic?
I think it's the topic. Like if I've never spoken on a topic before and it's my first time presenting on it,
Okay,
that's when I start to overthink. That's when I start to panic about all the details.
got it. So, can
But
we
if it's
get your
something that
first panic session out of the way before you do it in a high stake environment?
hmm,
What if you
yeah.
presented that topic for the very first time in a low stakes environment? So that way you get all the dry heaving and all the weird stuff out of the way.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it no longer becomes your first time and now it becomes your second time.
All right. I'm gonna sign up for NLP training with you
No,
or
but
maybe just
doesn't
hire
that
you
make
to do
sense
this. It
though?
does make
Doesn't that make
sense.
sense?
Yeah,
So, and I
it
think
does.
you would definitely appreciate it because again, you're someone that appreciates frameworks and processes. And all I'm doing is saying, so how do you do the process of that?
So let me ask you, how do you struggle with these things yourself? And the reason why I ask is like, and this is a conversation I've had with a few people lately, where I can coach people no problem, right? Like I can walk you through a number of exercises to help you figure out where you're misaligned in your identity, in your behavior, in your communications. I can do that no problem. But when it comes to myself and applying it to myself, actually was just talking to somebody about this at coffee this morning. It's so
The one
hard.
coffee you had today.
The one coffee that I had today, which served as my breakfast, lunch, and maybe dinner, um, that's one of the things we were talking about is like, because she's also a coach. And we were talking about how it's so easy for us to tell other people this and guide them through this. But then when it comes to ourselves, there's blind spots, biases, whatever you want to call it, that make it so hard to apply it ourselves. So, do you ever find yourself struggling with this, or has
I
NLP
mean,
become so second nature for you that,
feel like in it I feel like NLP is very much integrated in how I think and the things that I do. So anytime I feel like, let's say, a major negative emotion, which is like anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, or even shame, there's a process on how to release those negative emotions. And PS, by the way, the process for that is to ask yourself, what are the positive learnings that I could take from this experience so that way it doesn't affect me moving forward? Okay. Now, if I keep experiencing that feeling, then there's something that I need to have elicited. And so sometimes when someone else asks you a question, our minds are ask a question, wants to respond, ask a question, wants to respond. And so having a practitioner who can help you do that is always going to be helpful. Now, if you don't have someone who is open minded or can do that, right? Because sometimes when you talk to a friend wants to just sit in it with you. You're like, I don't want to sit in
mhm,
this any longer.
Yep.
I want to wash my hands of it. I want to be free of it, right? And so, but if you had to do it yourself, and I've had to do this to myself, is we have that process. I'm sure you've heard of it, perceptual positions. So, position number one is looking through my own eyes. What do I see? What do I hear? What are my values? What are my beliefs? What are my attitudes? Right. And then in perceptual position number two, now act as if you're the other person. Where are they coming from in their own model of the world? How do they view you? So, for example, my parent doesn't understand, times have changed, da 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 da. But in their model of the world, they're looking at you and they're like, I used to wipe his butt. Like that's how they view you.
Yeah.
Okay. Now take that into the workplace. And now it could be like different generations, like boomers, millennials, Gen Z, whatever. So that's just like position number one, position number two. Now, perceptual position number three is like, boop, can you, Doctor Strange, get out of your own body and act as if you're watching a movie and then be able to call out, well, she feels this way, he feels that way. That's where the disconnect is. Okay. And then we have another one, which is like perceptual position number four. Boop, you go out and now you're watching the observer observe what's happening on the screen. Is the observer perceptual position number three? Are they bringing in their own biases? Are they bringing in their own feelings and their own stories? Because we always have that saying of perception is projection. Like big ideas cannot be contained in small minds. So are the people that you're talking to, are they expanding? Are they willing to jump in different bodies, quantum leap into it, and offer you that perspective? But those are two exercises that you can do.
Yeah. I'm so intrigued by NLP, and again, like I mentioned earlier, like I consider myself an effective communicator, right? Like I've taught workshops on communication and emotional intelligence and all these things that really feed into NLP or vice versa.
Yeah.
And as you're talking and you're explaining, I'm like questioning myself if I'm as effective of a communicator as I think I am, even with my internal language, not for any bad reason, but like I think NLP provides a framework for understanding again, like the neuro aspect of things and how
Yeah.
things are connecting that we're just not like we don't really learn about or we're not cognizant of like organically. And so for me, like I'm a systems thinker and to like this seems like it would give me that system of understanding what's firing in my brain and how I'm responding to each um every oh my god, I'm blanking out on the term.
Come on, cheese it power.
I know, come
Like
on,
your
cheese
cheese
it.
it, cheesy
Every
fingers combined.
stimulus, thank you, I found it. Every like stimulus in my day to day, I think NLP can help provide me with a way to understand that better, if that makes sense.
Okay, so like one of our presuppositions that we have in NLP, it's basically what is our belief model? And our belief is that the meaning of communication is the response that you get. So it's not necessarily the words that you use, but it's the response that you get. Have you ever been in a situation where someone said something to you and you didn't quite understand? And you're like, can you say that again? And they say it again verbatim, but this time they say it louder. And it's like, I'm not deaf. I just don't understand. Can you explain it a different way? Can you draw it out for me? Can you give me a map? Can you give me an example? Can you give me a visual? Is there a tutorial, right? There's like different things. Can you walk me through the process? Walk me through how you came to that conclusion. It's just, again, it's understanding how people process information and then having that flexibility to give the information in the way that they need it in order to make a decision, in order to be motivated, in order to have that reassurance. And sometimes, even when it comes to like clients, I'll just like, so how will you know that you're convinced?
Mm,
Like whether you're investing in a training, a certification, or just doing anything. Like how do you know that you made the right decision? Do you even know the process of like how do I know that I made the right decision? Did I have to see something? Did I have to hear something? Did I have to feel something? Did I have to compare it? And how many times did I have to be convinced? Am I just make a decision and I do it, which is awesome? Or did you have to like think about it and then go to a friend and then get feedback from another friend? And then now you've asked five friends. Hopefully by then you make a decision. But some people don't. Sometimes they keep looping and looping. You're like, wow, you're still thinking about that? It's like they don't have an exit loop in their decision making strategy. And again, that's where you come in as a practitioner and say, so based on what I just asked you, this is how you think. Is that a problem? If it's not a problem, leave it alone. But if it's a problem, okay, how do we make it not a problem?
Hmm. I feel like you just talked to all the blue personalities in the room. Um, okay, so let's take this a little bit to what you do outside of NLP with Captivate on Command. You
Yeah.
spent 15 years in the ad agency world, and we both know that if marketing is how you build a brand that attracts customers, leadership is how you build a culture that attracts employees. You help your clients create crave-worthy content that hooks prospects in. So if a leader that's listening right now wants to create that crave-worthy culture that magnetizes their employees, and again, I'm taking what you typically do and putting it into kind of the concept
Into
of
the corporate
work,
workspace. Yeah.
not just like the personal branding context. But how does that person take the principles of NLP to help them align their internal communication to drive that behavior with their teams?
So the word values alignment gets thrown out a lot,
A
right?
lot.
A lot. And from an NLP perspective, I would say, well, how do you get your team aligned with your values? Because everyone will hear a word like discipline and will have their own internal representation of what discipline means. Like for me, for example, discipline means back in the day when I was in ROTC and I had to be disciplined to know of ironing my uniform, shining my shoes, making sure that all of my buckles and all of that stuff was shined. Some people might hear the word disciplined and like, oh, that was when my mom went to the backyard, got a tree, and just whooped me, right? It's like it can mean different things. And so values alignment is really, do you and your team see it the same way? And if they don't, that's okay, because you could still say, well, when I say disciplined, what does that mean to you? Maybe there's what we call a complex equivalent. So discipline can also mean uh, committed, like I have the commitment. And that's okay. They just have to make that bridge, that connection between the ideas. Because if one idea is never connected to another one, then that's where you have misalignment. They're not seeing the same things. And so from a corporate, I would then say, okay, these values that you have hung in the break room, what does that mean really? And does everyone else on the team, from VPs to directors to managers and even the front line, do they share that same vision? I would say that some of the best founders that I've ever worked for did a really great job in communicating what that looked like, what it sounded like, what it felt like. And then being able to have the team also express, okay, so what does that mean to you? How can you make it so that it now has meaning to you in the sense that you're aligned with it and you can move towards it. Otherwise, if you're like, nah, I'm not on board, well, that's the thing. If you're not 100% all in, if you leave 1% doubt, well, then that's not support, that's sabotage. So if you have someone on the team who's like, I don't believe this, they're already planting the seeds of sabotage. They're already thinking like, who else can be on this? Do you want an alliance? Who could be in their alliance of sabotage, right?
Let's scale that a little bit to more of the macro level because, I've from what we talked about in this episode,
Mhm.
NLP seems like it's incredibly powerful on an individual level or even a one to few, one to many kind of context. But let's say that there's a CEO who is looking at this and thinking, okay, I have 500 employees. I can't do individual NLP sessions or like individual conversations where I try to apply this like NLP practice with each and every one of them. So, how does NLP translate from kind of a personal coaching model, coaching context to a massive organizational context? How do you embed these principles into that macro culture of a company so that it scales?
I mean, there's lots of ways. So I'll give you another thing that we teach in NLP, which is like our presuppositions. So again, one of the things that we hold very true is to respect the other person's model of the world. if you said that that was one of your values, people are like, "Well, what does that mean?" It's like, know that your manager has different deadlines, different expectations, and that's where they're coming from when they communicate to you. And then for an employee, like, what are they thinking about? It's like, "When am I getting my paycheck? I'm TSA, I'm this." There's certain things, and so even if you just held that idea of respect the other person's model of the world, or let's say another one is everyone's doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. Not everyone has the same education level, not everyone has the same conflict conflict resolution strategy. Some people don't even know how to resolve a conflict because they were
Yeah,
never taught. Some
right.
people grew up watching Jerry Springer, and if something hit the fan, it's you grab a chair and
Throw a
you throw
chair.
it. You throw a
Yeah.
chair, right? So those are things, concepts, I believe that you could bring into the workforce without having to do one-on-one stuff. It's just like, can we all agree? Can we all agree that with every conflict, it's usually because an underlying need is not being met? And it could just be that you're not communicating or sharing information in other people's representational systems. So sometimes maybe you're only communicating via Slack with this 30 bullet point checklist of all the things to do, when really that person could probably learn a whole heck of a lot faster if you just sent over a Loom video. Sometimes you just have to see it versus just reading it, getting lost, reading it, and getting lost.
Let's talk a little bit about what I consider a risk in terms of, somebody listening to this or somebody who comes across NLP and thinks about applying it. Because when people hear that they need to change their language to change their reality, the immediate corporate trap, from my perspective, is toxic positivity. Leaders might start sugarcoating massive systemic failures or layoffs or telling burnt out employees to look on the bright side, or trying to reframe layoffs as quote unquote synergy alignments,
Yeah.
or whatever they might choose for that round of layoffs. How do we draw the line between using NLP to build a genuinely engaged culture and using it as a manipulative tool to gaslight employees who are dealing with really broken systems?
I mean, in all honesty, it's just like having tools in your tool belt, right? You could use a hammer to build a house, or you could use a hammer to like, you know, bash somebody's brains in. It depends on who's the wielder of it, right? At the end of the day, when it comes to NLP, it's the meaning of communication is the response that you get. And you can use language in such a way, like words are powerful. Words can unite teams. Words can get people motivated, but words can also break down people's, I don't even want to say it, like break down people's motivations and this and that. Like they could really tear down a person. And so it really boils down to what are the intentions. And I think for me, as if I were an employee, I would want to know, who am I actually supporting? Do I believe in them? Do I believe in their values? And if I don't, then for what purpose am I here? Am I just here for a paycheck? And if I'm just here for a paycheck, then okay, then that's the role that I'm going to fulfill. But if I feel like I'm here for this organization because we are making a change, then I'm going to show up with that type of energy into it.
I love that. It's a great way to kind of bring this episode to a close. But one more question, because I try to leave my listeners with something actionable to take away with every episode. So, whether it's an executive that's trying to align their team of thousands, for example, or an exhausted professional that's just trying to find the capacity to engage today, what would you say is one specific shift in their vocabulary that they can make tomorrow to start to rewire their reality?
Ooh, goodness. If I were to leave them with one thing, um,
No pressure.
there's so much. Like, I would really it would be really nice if people really knew what they wanted. So it's like, is this what you really want? Like for you, not because someone said you should do this or you should do that. You've been shit on. Okay. Stop being shit on. And what does this really mean for you? For what purpose? How would that make you feel? What would that do for you? Not world peace, but for you. And I think if people start looking at it from that lens, they'll start to uncover, well, what is important to me? What are my values? Once you know what your values are, you're not going to be leaking energy into like, should I do this? Should I do that? You'll know as a filter, like, not in alignment, not going to do it.
I would take that a step further and again, going back to what you said earlier in the episode, like, don't let them just be values that are on the wall or
In the
somewhere in
break
your
room?
notebook. Like, and I talk about this in previous episodes of like the gap between values and virtues, and really taking what you say are your values and putting it into action and living
Mhm.
it through your day to day. I think that's really powerful and important. So thank you for that takeaway and for showing us that engagement isn't just an HR metric, it's a neurological output based on the language that we choose. And if any of our listeners want to learn more about NLP or sign up for training with you to join me maybe in a cohort, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I would say the best way, fast track, front of the line, is find me on LinkedIn. So just type in Stephanie Garcia, go to Captivate on Command, and you'll find me. And I find most people would be like, Stephanie, here's a problem. And I'll be like, let's make it not a problem.
Yeah. Well, you'll definitely be hearing from me. And to our listeners, I told Stephanie this at the beginning, but I'm running on empty because I didn't have lunch today and I'm running on Cheez Its. And I should have led the episode with that because I feel like that would have set a much more candid, casual premise than what we had. But if you were as intrigued by this practice of NLP and neuro linguistic programming, and you've understood what I've understood in that your words or the words that you use really build the world that you work in, and the importance of making sure that you're designing your reality with those words. Go hit up Stephanie. I don't even know if that sentence made sense. Um,
You're
but
having your own existential
I
moment.
am having my own existential crisis. But if this conversation made you realize that there might be a misalignment in how you're showing up or how you're
Yeah.
communicating with yourself, go reach out to Stephanie. Go talk to her because it makes all the difference to have a guide, to have somebody help you through this process and not have to work through it alone. So her link will be in the show notes. So make sure to go click that, reach out to her, and see if she can help you. Stephanie, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me today in this conversation and helping me survive through this Cheez It fueled episode. I really was like, my mind was opened from this conversation because, again, like it kind of challenged some of the preconceived notions I have of myself and my ability to communicate or like just connect the things that I've learned in the past and
It's
figure out
just
how
another version. I mean,
it's
you're
another
always
version.
yeah, you're always updating your phone because there's new features. You have a new feature, which is
Yeah.
entrepreneurship,
Yeah,
and that
for
comes
sure.
along with it, new hardware, new software updates, and you're just in that process of and anytime you update your phone, you always have to delete old storage, right? So that's the unlearning piece of it, of what no longer serves me, right? If it doesn't
Yeah.
evolve me, it doesn't involve me in this next version of who it is that I wanna be.
Yeah. Hmm. All right. I can't say anything after that because I'm closing the episode on that. So thanks again. I'm closing us out. I'm Clarence Moore. This is Aligned, Engaged, Fulfilled. I'll see you next week.